So in addition, Deana's going to join me for a panel on the state of FinOps data. We're going to be joined by Rakinder from Deloitte and also Alee from Disney. So welcome them out as well, please. Deana's award is up there, by the way, but I was told not to hand them back and forth, so we're going to give it to her later. Hello. So this panel was very intentionally designed a mix of all the personas in the foundation. So we've got consultancy, we've got 2 practitioners, but Alee was also formerly on the AWS Optics team, which worked with a lot of their large customers through this. So excited to get the cross slice of everybody's inputs here. What we're going to talk about is the state of FinOps data. Some of you have seen some of this on our summits. This was our 2nd annual survey. We had about 1,056 respondents. Those people, by the way, gave us almost 30 minutes of their time and represented almost a quarter of the community at the time to cover about $40 billion of cloud spend. That was how much they represented. So overall, the demographics were from large organizations, and this is about that shift left in adoption. We had 40+% were 10,000 person plus companies, 70+% were over 1,000 person companies, and really represented from all over the globe. So with that, I wanted to get the panelists' input on this. Interestingly, we saw financial services as the top industry represented in the survey respondents, followed by software and technology, no surprise there, and then a long tail of others, healthcare, media, retail. Why don't we start right next to me here, Rakinder. Does this align to what you're seeing in the industry, and why do you think those ones are on top?
Yeah, I would say when I took a look at this data, it was not a big surprise that financial services, telecom, media, technology, and healthcare were kind of at the top. I think it goes in line with cloud adoption. I mean, from a Deloitte perspective, those are the industries that we see that are really leading from a cloud adoption perspective. So it's not really a big surprise that the survey respondents would represent those industries. Yeah, I guess I spent a lot of my time in financial services, and I'm glad to see financial services leading the pack there. But one of the things to note, I would say there's a story inside each of those bars where even in financial services, there's a pretty high degree of variability around, or maturity, I guess I should say, around where different FIs stand around cloud adoption. You've got some that are super mature, and then you've got some that are still trying to kind of dip their toe in the water and figure out how this whole thing works.
Awesome. Alee, what have you seen as part of your work previously and where you are?
Yeah, definitely. So my old team, Optics, actually worked with some of AWS's largest and most complex customers across all different industries. When I first started there in 2019, there was about 3 of us on the team. When I left, there were nearly 30 to 40 of us. I think that's just a clear sign to show how much adoption has grown, but how much our customers, now myself as a customer, are prioritizing this and making it something that is just a part of our experience.
And you've been, Deana, in both tech and retail. What have you seen differences between the two and how the FinOps practices were structured?
I'd say, Alee, that was really well said. I'd say from my experiences, seeing that other adoption, it's not unlike what Rakinder mentioned. There's a wide range of the adoption scale. And there are still people figuring it out in each of those sectors. So really, it's a good reflection. It's an aggregate. We can't make too many assumptions about what that says about us individually. And what we also know is that there's a ramp to getting very proficient very quickly, and this is one of the starting points.
Very true. So let's look at the next data point, which has always been the most interesting to me anyway, about the top challenges. We asked, what are your pain points in your practice? Not surprisingly, this year as last year, enabling and getting engineers to take action on cost optimizations was the top challenge. Notable drop this year from last year, share cost and the allocation of share cost dropped considerably. It was the number 2 challenge last year. It went, I think, all the way down to 7 or 8 this year. Now, obviously, it depends on maturity, and it's a question of did things change because we have earlier stage people. But Deana, from your take, why do you think it stacked up this way, and why do you think things like shared cost dropped so much?
I think both of those are really important indicators, but maybe not why you would think. The shared cost, because it's a learnable skill, and there are applicable tools, and a whole bunch of new tools that have flooded into the market, and a whole bunch of new knowledge that has been shared about strategies for those. And I think one of the things that we figured out is that there's not just one strategy for shared cost allocation. There's a whole bunch of really good questions to ask to find out which strategy is going to be best for you. And with the, with the engineering question, getting engineers to take action, I'm a little nervous.
My heart was pounding when I ran up, so yes, I get it.
I think that you can substitute the word engineers with any role in your organization. When I talk with groups of engineers, when I talk with groups of analysts, I don't think anyone is necessarily saying that any role could be solely responsible for being a bottleneck. The question you've got to start asking is, if action is getting friction, take a step back, look at your culture, look at your communication patterns, look at your anti-patterns, and chances are the engineers are really willing to take action, they're really willing to be accountable, and it's very much they want consistency of message, consistency of what will be psychologically safe, what will be rewarded, and what's actually being incentivized. So take a look at those incentives.
Absolutely. What have you seen Alee work for enabling the right decisions to be made?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's more about how do we better support our engineers. I think in the past, it's been more of an afterthought. It's always been a little bit more reactive. How do we get them the right tools, the right information that they need from the get-go so that it's no longer, hey, you need to lower your cost. It's how can we optimize how you're building your applications, how you're using the various services from the beginning. So rather than thinking about how do we get engineers to take action, how do we, as the folks in this room, better enable our teams to be successful and make the right decisions?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I love the anti-pattern comment, by the way, also. This is very true. Rakinder, so I think you had a good take on this recruit before. Like, how would you group these things together?
Yeah, like a true consultant, I got to try and simplify this because there's too many things for me to understand.
You're not billing us right now, are you?
No,
Great,
this,
okay,
is
not
free,
yet.
this is free advice.
Take it for what it's worth.
If I was to take a look at this data and try and kind of summarize it a little bit in a way that you could take some action on it, kind of what stood out to me was that you could really group all these things into three buckets. There's like people issues, there's data issues, so a lot of these kind of just focus on reporting, aggregation of data, and then there's some stuff in here around tactics, just some things that are hard to do. And so if I was to create a go-forward plan on how to take action on some of these things, I would really try and bucket it around those three categories.
Makes sense. So now we're going to ask all of you to pull out your phones. The screen should switch in just a minute, I think up there. And if you can go to menti.com, menti.com. There we go. And at the very top in tiny letters that I can barely see, I hope you can, you're going to enter the code, which is, ready? 17263261. Now, this is a word cloud, which means we need you not to put any bad words in this because there's no 15-second delay. But start putting in the words, the actions, the things that you do in your own organizations to encourage and enable action by engineering teams. I see some people looking up, so hopefully the magic should happen soon. Oh, here we go. Ooh. What do you think?
I agree with There's a lot of really great ones in there.
See, cost transparency, accountability, data.
It all starts at data.
It really does. Which is funny, that's like the hardest thing in this space, right? In terms of the granularity, the frequency, the allocation of, and then getting it in front of the right people. Mm-hmm. What else is standing out?
It keeps moving.
This is harder to see than we expected.
What's in the center?
So in a lot of ways, I think this we did a working group last year on this very topic, and we got 440 responses of how people did it. Wow, a lot of good stuff. We did not test this ahead of time, at least not with 400 people. But what came at us that, yeah, we see, people needed to first provide visibility. That was kind of the crawl stage, right? Then you get into incentivization with scorecarding, other things, gamification. But then ultimately getting into, I love the accountability point, executive mandates, making sure that cost is baked into sprints, those types of things. Deana, you're coming directly out of engineering world. Like, what of this resonates for you?
Full disclosure, I can't see those words. But coming out of the engineering world, I'll tell you, in my experience and in the different teams that I've worked with, what works for the team depends on what patterns are already established. If you've already got a very high trust culture, a high performing team, chances are gamification is going to work great. You're going to get a lot of people incentivizing each other just with social pressure. And at other times, it's going to be very much a little bit more hand-holding, a little bit more of that, that understanding of the whys. And I think that's where I love that slide from 2019 where you're breaking down the barriers between silos, because that still is happening. And it's actually a thing that you have to do all the time. As engineers roll off and as other leaders roll off, cultures change and communication patterns change. You've got to still be very vigilant about keeping those silos, they're specialized, and so silos happen, but you've got to keep them connected.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. So the silos, I think, are still one of the hardest problems. And if we can get switched back to the slides also from the crew, thank you. Let's talk about the team that is hopefully responsible for breaking down those silos. So one of the things we saw in the data was that team sizes are increasing, right? You saw this slide earlier. Big question I think that always comes up is, when do you increase the team size? What is the measure of it? Is it based on cloud spend? Is it based on capability? Alee, let's start with you on this one. What do you think should be the primary drivers of team increase?
I'd say there's really no perfect team size, and I think your various teams and the way that their needs change will define what your team size is. So for example, at Disney, we have our enterprise organization where we have our team, but we also have our segment teams. And truthfully, sometimes it might make more sense to have their teams grow versus ours, because they're able to be on the ground working with their individual product teams to make sure that they're enabling them and giving them the tools that they need, where we're doing it from more of the consolidated level.
Yep.
And so I think it really varies at the different stages of it, but kind of going back to it, if you don't have the data and you don't have your initial kind of core team there at that crawl stage, you really can't scale.
Well, that's, really interesting you mentioned that, what I would call the central team, right, versus the business units or the external ones. There is finding that balance of what do you put in that central enablement team, but also not stack that team too large that really you should be enabling the spokes rather than just the hub. Rakinder, any thoughts on this before we look at the team structure?
This is not my favorite slide, and I will tell you why, because so the top around maturity and the bottom, one doesn't imply the other. You could have a really mature team of 3 people, and that could be the right size for a given organization based on how much cloud they're using, the number of hyperscalers involved, number of business units. All of those things need to be thought about when trying to answer this question of team size. And as consultants, we get asked all the time, what's the right team size?
Yeah.
And the answer is rarely here's the number.
Well, let's look at some sample. This is an actual real world example that was anonymously shared. 9-figure a year cloud spender, been in it for a while. These are the roles they put out there. Deana, do you see this as the typical makeup? Would you add or remove things from this? Data analysts, data engineers, cost engineers, automation?
I think for a lot of teams, it will be aspirational. That's my quick answer. And that a lot of teams that will aspire to this probably shouldn't. Because of what Rakinder and Alee just said, there is no ideal team size, and what I may think after much analysis and data and communication today is a perfect team size for my team is going to change. It's going to change because my business is going to change. So for that reason, I really do think that it's important for teams to measure their size and understand how they think it relates to their maturity at that time, but they should also understand how they define maturity. So team size, not an indicator of maturity, and maturity not necessarily an indicator of team size. There may be some correlation for an individual benchmark situation, but industry-wide, across FinOps practices, it's a lot more to unpack.
Well, and in some ways, I also think there can and should be this bell curve where initially the team is small. It gets large over time as you're building out reporting practices, evangelizing. We have some folks here who are building everything themselves, others who are buying platforms. But then the really advanced teams are meant to be enabling teams. Ashley Ramatko on my team hates when I say this, but I don't think the FinOps team should be doing FinOps. They're really about enabling the other teams to do so. And I think she doesn't like it because it implies they don't do anything, but they have a central function of rate management, right, enablement, visibility, reporting, all these things, but it shouldn't be a giant team that owns this over time. So let's talk about everybody's favorite and least favorite topic, tooling. We intentionally left this really not detailed because we didn't want to get into too many debates. This is all available on the website, though, in a minute we'll show you. So notable things here, homegrown tooling made a big jump up this year over last year. Native tools continue to be, ahead, not surprising because everybody uses them. And, longer tail, a lot of different platforms involved. Rakinder, how about we start with you on this? Where do you see particularly the build versus buy conversation happening right now? Where do you see, people putting together that mix? Because also 3.7 average tools across the respondents.
Yeah, I think my answer there is all of it. And the reason for that, many of our tool vendors and partners are out here today, and they've heard me say this before. And the way that we look at this from a practice perspective is very much that we want to arm our people with as many tools as possible. So it's very much a tool belt conversation, and how many tools do you have in your tool belt versus having one tool and walking around with a hammer trying to solve every problem.
Absolutely. There is no right answer, I think, right, with this. It depends. Alee, I noticed AWS Kudos, is that how you said it? Is that what your team worked with there? Or?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, so the Kudos is part of the Cloud Intelligence Dashboard, and if you guys want to learn more about that, talk to Aaron.
No sales pitches. I wasn't meant to be that.
Oh, sorry. No, but I think the most important part about that is, now as myself as a customer, one of the things I notice is, it doesn't really matter what tools you're using. Like what you mentioned, it's your toolkit. But I think it's also how do you bring those together so that you can use them in parallel with each other to create kind of a streamlined experience. There is no right tool, but there are ones that make the most sense for your organization, and how do you maximize your investment? Because tools cost money. Even a homegrown tool costs money. So how do you make sure that your toolkit makes sense for your teams and is always adding value?
Even the homegrown tool cost money thing, I think is really important, to underscore, because I've seen so many organizations go and try and boil the ocean and build all their own stuff, and then they get it there, and then priorities shift and things fall over, and they have to go, reassemble things. So to me, I keep seeing it be kind of like a buy, build, and augment sort of combination, where we're seeing people use a platform for this and use some native tooling here and kind of plug it into their Tableau or anywhere else. But yeah, I think the tool belt example is a great way to look at that. So in 10 seconds each, when we come back next year to FinOps X, wherever it may be, what do you think is going to be the hot topic that we're talking about from the survey results or otherwise? Alee?
I'd say sustainability being part of the optimization discussions, not as a separate topic.
Nice. Rakinder?
I would say starting to get into cost beyond just IaaS and starting to look at PaaS and a more fulsome view of IT cost.
Getting the spread. Final word, Deana?
Oh, gosh. I think that it's going to be an expansion of the community. I think that where we see a lot of folks who may have come out of the ITAM space, the software asset management space, I think that there will be a lot more convergence and a lot more transition, evolution.
It's like the merging of the disciplines in a lot of ways, right? They're coming together.
It's not a competition. It might be a race.
There we go, race to the top. Well, thank you, panelists, so much for your time and feedback and everything. We'll see you soon. Also, excited to announce that as of 10 minutes before this started, finally, data.finops.org is live with the new 2022 data. So please go check that out. It's very pretty. Shout out to Steve Trask on our team and Tom Sharp, who did all the graphics and visuals. It's a really, really beautiful report. It's not a boring PDF. It's interactive and lovely. It also digs into a lot of the more details, including things like tool breakdowns, team salaries, other challenges and containers, and more. So check that out. JR here from the FinOps Foundation. Thank you for watching. Please go to FinOps.org if you want to get plugged into this amazing community. And of course, hit subscribe right here on YouTube to get all the future content. Hope to see you soon.